All right. Hello and welcome everyone to a special program about Marianne McGregore, presented by local, I would just say local treasure and now published author TJ Cullinane. This is, I believe, part of his People of Derry series, and I'm very excited to learn about this woman. I actually don't know a lot about her, and I assume everyone is here because they're excited to learn about her as well. Once again, make sure that your microphones are muted, and if you have questions, you can put them into the chat, and we will read them at the end of the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to TJ Cullinane.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. And it's great to see everybody. I see some old friends out there, and it's been so long, and I'm very happy to see you. And I'm very proud of the Derry Public Library, chosen by the New Hampshire Library Trustees Association as the 2021 Library of the Year, which is, yay. All right, Liz, great news for them, bad news for me, because now the library is going to be able to attract a better quality of speaker. And I think I'm going to be out of the job. So
Nonsense.
how that goes. Ladies and gentlemen, as I was preparing this this presentation, it was originally given during our 300th anniversary back in 2019, and I called it Marianne McGregore Reconsidered. But sometimes I thought to myself as I was doing the research, that was she ever considered at all? If you look at some of the early histories, the migration seems to be an exclusively male enclave. There's hardly any mention made of the women. And so this meager effort that I will share with you this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is an attempt to address that. I was lamenting this fact about the lack of information on Marianne and her fellow female settlers to a group of visitors from Northern Ireland. And one of them quickly quipped, "But TJ, what are you talking about? They named a diner after Marianne." And well, hey, you got me there. But in any event, I thought it appropriate to begin our reflection on Marianne McGregore with a quote from Scripture, suitably Old Testament. But when we look at it, when we read it, the deeper meaning here is that marriage is a team. And in fact, in the contemporary Greece, married people are known as yoke mates. That is, two oxen in a yoke plowing along together. So this is really a story about teamwork and about overcoming challenges. If there are any takeaways that you get from tonight's presentation, I would like them to be this: that first, we all of us, stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And with the first settlers, the Reverend James MacGregore and his wife, Marianne, those are a very, very wide pair of shoulders. The other thing I'd like to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, is that trauma was Marianne's normalcy. As we begin to discuss her life and the life of her fellow settlers and what they were subjected to, it was a hard life. And we'll explore that a little bit more. We'll begin the story at the beginning, and we're just going to put up here a map of Ulster Province, the north of Ireland. And I just circled some key areas here. Right in the center, right of the screen, you'll see Ballymoney. And that was the town where Marianne Cargill was born. Up at the top, you'll see McGilligan Point, and that's where her famous husband, the Reverend James McGregor, was born. Down in the lower left-hand side, you'll see Londonderry. Depending on your point of view, your religious persuasion, the Catholics, nationalists prefer to call it Derry. The Protestants, more unionists, wanting to stay within the United Kingdom, refer to it as Londonderry. The small parish of Agadooey is where the Reverend McGregor was ordained in 1701. And then at the top of the screen, you'll see Bushmills, which I circled just because they make a darn good whiskey up there. And then right at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Kilrea. I live on Goodhue Road, and the next road up from me is Kilray Road. And I always wondered where that came from, and now I know. So this is the region of Ireland, the north of Ireland, as you can see up in the upper left, where Marianne grew up, where she met her husband, and where she ultimately immigrated from to what was then the 13 colonies. Here's a timeline of Marianne McGregor, and you can see right off the bat by the asterisks that there are many conflicting accounts of her major events in her life. And I've tried to piece this together the best I could, but I know we have some red hot genealogists out there in tonight's audience, and I would just challenge you to take on Marianne and try to put some more fidelity on these major life dates. So Marianne was born Marianne Cargill in Ballymoney, as we saw. Her name is sometimes spelled Marion. Her parents were David and Jeanette Cargill. David was a prosperous mill owner. He was an elder in the church, and he was also a soldier. He was a company commander in the Williamite militia that defended Londonderry during the siege from the Jacobites. And he commanded, at one point 100 men, and saw some very, very hard fighting, as did most of the early settlers who followed the Moses of the Scotch-Irish, James MacGregor, to the 13 colonies. Somewhat surprising to me is that both David and her mother, Jeanette, would migrate with Marianne. And as a matter of fact, Marianne's mother would outlive her by 9 years. And if you come on the cemetery tour on the 16th, we'll be able to pay a visit to Marianne's gravestone and that of her parents, who were buried together in a lovely stone with some wonderful carving featuring effigies of David and Jeanette. I knew that she had one sister, Martha, who was younger than her. And of course, the key date for our story is August 29th, when at the age of 29, she married the Reverend James MacGregor. James MacGregor was a force of nature. He was a child soldier during the siege of Londonderry. 12 years old, he was compelled to man the barricades. He endured the 105-day siege under starvation conditions. By the end, they were resorting to eating rats and seaweed that washed up on the shore. Cavalry clashes were ceased immediately by both sides when a horse was down, so that they could divide up the horse and eat it. Such were the conditions that MacGregor and his fellow residents of Londonderry endured during the siege. There is some discrepancy as to the birth dates of Marianne's children. There is one line of research that contends that when Marianne boarded the good ship Robert to make the journey to the colonies, that she was actually pregnant at the time. But we know for sure that she was tending to toddlers, 2-year-olds, when she boarded the good ship Robert in 1718 to make the journey. And one can just try to imagine what was it like to board a tall ship, with at least a half dozen small children, some of them very, very young, and make the journey across the North Atlantic in 1718. I just really can't imagine it. A British Guards officer who made the journey later on in that century, sailing over to fight against the Americans in the Revolutionary War, described his passage thusly: "There was continuous destruction in the foretops, the pox above board, the plague between the decks, hell in the forecastle, and the devil at the helm." So that just, tries to, picture in your mind just how horrible the conditions were for a woman just turned 37 with small children and very, very arduous conditions. And it also speaks to how tough our predecessors were. One of the migrants journeying with Marianne and the Reverend MacGregor was Peter Cochrane, who was 92 years old when he made the journey. And he survived the journey, and as a matter of fact, lived for another 4 years after arriving here in Nutfield. So a tough bunch. Marianne, of course, settled in Derry with her husband, and we'll speak more to that a little bit later. Her husband died in 1729, her first husband, I should say. And in 1730, she married the successor of James MacGregor at the First Parish Church, the Reverend Matthew Clark. And this gentleman was quite the character, he, like the Reverend MacGregor, served during the siege, and he was seriously wounded during the combat. He received a blow to the head with a sword, and that cut never healed. He had a suppurating wound on his head to the day he died, and he often wore a dark eye patch, which gave him a rather sinister appearance. And his decorum and his outlook perhaps matched his rather ferocious appearance. When I was speaking with some of our visitors from Northern Ireland who came over during the 300th anniversary, they gave me this story about the Reverend Clark in one of his sermons. He was speaking on the Passion of our Lord in the Garden of Gethsemane, and in some of the Gospels, Mark and John, they recount the story of Peter drawing a sword and slicing off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. And Jesus was compelled to heal Malchus and put his ear back. But the whole point of the Reverend Clark's sermon on this subject was, why didn't Peter take his claymore and cleave Malchus right down the middle of the head? So very much ferocious, somewhat of definitely a praise the Lord and pass the ammunition sort of a minister. If you really want to get the essence of the Reverend Matthew Clark, it's informative to read his epitaph on his grave. And I'll give you the Latin and then the translation. O homo si soris quod esses et unde veneris, nuncum gauderis sed in omni tempore fleris, which is, O man, if you knew what you are and whence you come, never would you rejoice, but weep for all time. Oh, poor Marianne. I don't know what it would have been like to be married to the Reverend Matthew Clark. As we see further on, her father, David, a prosperous mill owner in the old world, was equally prosperous here in Derry, working in the flax trade. He passed away in 1734, followed by Marianne herself at the age of 52. And then, as we see in that bottom bullet, Marianne was outlived by her mother by 9 years, and they're all buried very close to each other up at Forest Hill Cemetery. So what was it like to be a woman in the British Atlantic, living in the colonies? And as we see there in that first bullet, women's lives were largely, governed by the cycle of pregnancy, constantly trying to give birth during their quote unquote productive years, and the expectation within their society to be married with at least one child by the age of 25. You can see there that Marianne gave birth to 10 children, and some of these children went on to make very distinguished lives for themselves in the New World. Her son David became a pastor like his father, and took over what was then the West Parish and what later became Londonderry. David had a son also by the name of David, who would ascend to the rank of captain during the Revolutionary War. Alexander, her son, had a daughter, Susanna, and or a granddaughter, Susanna. And Susanna would marry a man by the name of Thomas Burnside, and together they would give birth to a child named Ambrose, who would rise to be a major general during the American Civil War. So Marianne, left a distinguished pedigree and produced some, famous descendants in their own right. It was a life of hard toil, as we'll see. Mary Saxton, who wrote about the early settlers of in Virginia, spoke of the role of the wife of the family as being battered by death and often divided by the Atlantic, and laboring very hard to reconstitute ties and extend new ones in the face of many deaths and epidemics, something that we ourselves right now are all too familiar with. But it was a very, very hard struggle. And we know that at least 3 of Marianne's children did not survive to be adults. And sadly, this was a fairly common occurrence. If I could just reduce the ethos to the earliest settlers to 3 words, I would choose industry, thrift, and stoicism. And it was a very, very hard life. A motto of the time was never let the sun catch you in bed, because there was so much work that had to be done. And the women were essential, not only to the success of the family, but to the success of the community. And in that field, we were an agricultural society, and the home was largely the center of production. And you can see, ladies and gentlemen, under the 3rd bullet, some of those subtasks, all the many arduous tasks. That was the lot of Marianne and, the women in the community. And that was hard, back-breaking work. And ironically, for the wife of a minister, in the household, it was the duty of the women to teach the children to read. And they were taught to read so they could read the Bible and study from the Bible. And that was the women who were doing that, and not the minister. And one wonders, the challenges that were unique to Marianne. She had these duties assigned to her by, societal norms and by, sheer necessity. Getting back to the team, the oxen and the yoke. But what was it like for Marianne to be married to this minister who was subjected to some extreme hardships as a child, who probably carried scars of those hardships, of warfare as a young man, of starvation, and of the expectations of his followers, and the strength that he portrayed that caused his followers to pack up and to leave the old world and make the arduous journey to the new. One wonders how much James MacGregor depended on Marianne and looked to her for strength. And it was only she that he could confide in. And again, he was a very tall, athletic man, a very strong man. And there's a famous story recounted to this day of how the men, when they first settled in Nutfield, went out to collect the hay, cut the hay, in the hayfields before Nutfield was incorporated were heavily used by men from Haverhill. So during the harvest, the men of Haverhill were none too pleased to see what they viewed as interlopers on the fields, and trouble started brewing between the residents of Nutfield, later Londonderry, and Haverhill. So one of the men from Nutfield ran back to the village and summoned Reverend MacGregor and said, "There's trouble brewing, Reverend MacGregor. The men of Haverhill are not too pleased with us. They view the hay fields as their property." So MacGregor went out, and the men of Haverhill were not impressed. And they said to the Reverend MacGregor, "Well, you know, it's only that black coat that's saving you from a big beating." To which the Reverend MacGregor doffed the coat and said, "Well, this black coat shan't save you." And with that, the men from Haverhill beat a hasty retreat. So a very strong man. And what a challenge it must have been for Marianne, you know, to be there for this strong man and to contribute to his strength. A very, very unique challenge, I think, for Marianne, on top of everything else that was required of her to do, you know, to be there and to be a pillar for her husband. Here we see somewhat of another aspect of the cultural expectations of a woman in the British Atlantic, a colonial woman. And what a contrast to society that we live in now. And another challenge, if you will, and another aspect. Our society now is so different, and thankfully so. But how tough it must have been for Marianne and for her fellow women to labor and to suffer and to support, and yet, you know, to remain in the background and, you know, to have to suffer quietly, you know, and perhaps confide in each other. But any assertions of a public nature were distinctly frowned upon in that society then. I just want to leave you with a concluding thought. This is from an artist, Jane Kim. And I think this is so true today. And I'd like to think that it was true in Marianne's time. You know, you really need a strong woman to have a successful society. And in doing so, you lend beauty to the world, you know. So milking cows and raising children, sadly burying children, but to persevere and to overcome, I think, lends beauty to our society and to theirs. And as a final slide, ladies and gentlemen, I will stop flapping my gums here and we can have a discussion. I just wanted to leave you with an image, an artist rendition of Marianne McGregor. And yes, I am related to the artist. Sarah Cullinane is my daughter. And she imagined, I asked her as an art student, you know, imagine, what do you think Marianne looked like? And this is what she came back with. So I think it captures her essence appropriately, and strength, wisdom, yet with perhaps a touch of wistfulness. You know, for all that she endured, and that for all she had to give to make her society, her community, and ultimately a country that would become the United States, what it is today. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the formal part of the presentation. And I guess now we'll open it up to discussion. And I'd love to hear your comments, and I hope that some of you are more learned, perhaps, and have knowledge that I wasn't able to uncover about Marianne McGregor and the early settlers, and that perhaps you'd be willing to share with us your thoughts and what you know about the early colonies with us this evening.
TJ, we do have 2 questions in the chat, if you'd like to start with those. The first is, would you talk about the evolution of the spelling of their last name? Because when we advertised it, I did MacGregor, like the park, but of course, it seems like it was originally McGregor.
Yeah, that's interesting. And as I alluded to, just about every source you go to has a different spelling. Mac, son of, is the traditional Scottish spelling. Heather, oh my goodness, Heather Rojo, who is a very accomplished genealogist, discovered that the name MacGregor was actually outlawed in Scotland during MacGregor's time, and that although the Reverend MacGregor was said to have graduated from the University of Glasgow, she could find no name MacGregor in the records because the name was outlawed. However, she did come across a James A. Gregor. So that just further adds to the mystery. And when was it? Was it 1842? Before, I might be getting my centuries mixed up, and I know I think I saw Eleanor Strang was in, but it was, I think, 1842 before Webster published the first dictionary, and we had a standard way of spelling, because before that it was rather an individualistic practice, which gives us all these various names and spellings of MacGregor. This is one I came across frequently, so I stuck with it. But well done by our gimlet-eyed members of the audience to pick up on that and to see the different spellings. Very good, very good. Thank you.
All right. Question number 2 comes from Bob. Do we know what caused her death?
We do not. Hey, everybody. Yes, I am that ugly. Sorry. But she lived to be 52, which in those days was a well-advanced age. So I'm just, making an uninformed guess that she actually, for her time, lived a fairly long life, and giving some of the challenges that she came up against in that life, I think she did pretty good to live to the ripe old age of 52. But I don't know what took her. We know that her husband was very healthy and very vigorous right up until his first serious illness, which turned out to be his final illness. So he caught a fever at 55, which was the first time that he really was sick, seriously ill, and it had ended up taking his life. But I can only speculate. But I would say that 52, that wasn't bad back then. You were doing okay.
Well, she had good genes because her mother outlived her and her father died only a few years before her.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Bob. Very, very good.
Question number 3 comes from Lorraine. Did the settlers have to face Indian attacks at the time?
Yeah, Lorraine, that's a great question. So the Reverend MacGregor is famous for bringing a loaded flintlock with him into church, into the meeting house, and keeping it behind the pulpit at all times. All men coming to the meeting on Sunday were armed. They were armed. There was always a weapon within arm's reach. To prevent against the depredations of the notorious Abenaki, who would occasionally come down from Maine. Now there's an interesting story that says that while he was matriculating at the University of Glasgow, one of Reverend MacGregor's classmates was a French diplomat. And the said diplomat was posted to Canada. And during the time of the French and Indian Wars and the time immediately leading up to that, he was the man who would direct where the French and Indians would raid. And the story goes that upon learning that his classmate, James MacGregor, was taking up a role as a community leader in Nutfield, later to become Londonderry, that he prevented the Indians, the French and Indians, from raiding our town just by class ties, by virtue of his being a classmate of the Reverend MacGregor. Now, I haven't been able to really get any hard documentary evidence, but that story does persist through the ages, if you will. And we know Haverhill was subjected to some serious raids. And of course, Haverhill is the home to the famous or infamous Anna Dustin, who we know during a lull in the flight, she was kidnapped by warriors. And when they made the mistake of falling asleep on the watch, she took a knife and did them all in and collected their scalps for the bounty that she would collect. So we know that the raids did occur in our region, and that the men were well armed, including bringing the loaded muskets into the church on meeting day, and that the region was subjected to the raids. But supposedly, there were, his classmate prevented a lot of the raids from taking place in this region. So that's a very long and roundabout answer to your question, Lorraine.
All right. Next question. They're coming in. Good job, everybody. This is from Eleanor. Do we know approximately how many people were on the ship with Marianne?
Yeah, it's a good question, Eleanor. So we know there were 17 families, right? And if we, would think that, we think that Marianne's family consisted of about 7. I don't know if you'd include the parents, but let's say 17 families, and we'll say 7 each, maybe. So maybe somewhere in the low hundreds, maybe 100, 125, 120, just extrapolating from the size of Marianne's family, and knowing that there were 17 families who made the journey on the good ship Robert across the stormy Atlantic in 1718. I know, Eleanor, you're somewhat of an accomplished scholar in this field. Does that ring true with you?
Yes, it does. I mean, just even thinking about something as obvious as the Pilgrims, that was around 100 people. So somewhere in the low hundreds makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad I'm not too far off, because I know you'd call me on it, Eleanor.
Don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions that have just crossed their mind at this point? As I say, I don't see any more. Trying to see if anyone else has any other questions. But if not, then I would just like to thank everyone for coming, or I would just say last call for questions at this point. Oh, we do have one. Do we know where the MacGregors homesteader, or was that where they were homesteading is what I'm guessing that question is. That's from
Yeah.
Larry.
Yeah, Larry, jeez. I've seen a rendering of their Garrison style home. And I would venture to guess it was probably close to the proximity of First Parish Church. But I wouldn't want to put money on that. So let me research that more, and I'll provide that information to Liz, because I know we do have the information. And Liz, if you wouldn't mind conveying that to Larry for me as a follow-up.
Sure. You can email me at lizr@derrypl.org, and I will get back to you when TJ gets back to me. Also, I will take this moment to plug, it's very dark behind me right now because we have timed lights, but the Derry Public Library's history room is open for use if you'd like to come utilize it. We have books about the town. We have old yearbooks. We have the house histories. We have old town reports. Anything you need for Derry and the surrounding towns, we've got it. And we also, depending on the day, have Erin Robinson, who is our very accomplished genealogist, reference librarian. So yeah, if you have any Derry history questions, the Derry Public Library is also a resource you can go to. Oh, I see another question from Eleanor, a raised hand.
Yes, hi. I just want to say good job, TJ, piecing together the life of Marianne, because I assume she left behind no writings. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke with the director of the fort at number 4 up in Charleston, New Hampshire, Gwendolyn Baker, who I consider an authority on early colonial America. And I said, Gwendolyn, what's the go-to source for women in colonial America? And I think it was the first time I was able to stump Wendy. She really, was taken aback, and it was a head scratcher. And I just think that is just such a terrible tragedy, that we'll really never know, Marianne's inner thoughts, how she felt about her life, and I just think that's a terrible shame. We really only know half the story. But Eleanor, if there's anybody who can uncover it, I know it's somebody like you. So get out there and get the real story, will you?
I'll see what I can dig up.
Thank you. Thank you. I've thrown the gauntlet down, madam.
All right, well, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. Great presentation. And yes, this was another great presentation from TJ. Hopefully we can have more in the future. Oh, we have another question. This is from Monica. I've read that there were 2 garrisons in Derry built during the French and Indian War. Have any remnants ever been discovered?
Geez, that's another good question. I know we have artifacts from the first meeting house, and those are at the Derry Museum of History. And yeah, there are actually a number of artifacts, not all of them martial in nature, as one would expect from a garrison, but we have a dugout canoe, and we actually have a door from the sheep's pen pews that were featured in the original meeting house. So yeah, maybe it's worth a visit to the Derry Museum of History and see the artifacts that we have there. And I know we do have a good collection, and maybe we do have some from the garrison type setting that you alluded to. We do have a fine collection of French and Indian War artifacts, including a beautiful powder horn. And I remember speaking with the gentleman Steve over at the Haverhill Historical Society, and I said, Steve, what part of history interests you the most? And he went, F and I. And I went, sorry, Steve, F and I. And I'm like, what do you have against the letter I, buddy? And he's like, no, F and I, French and Indian War, jerk. Like, oh, sorry, Steve. But, yeah, we have some good artifacts from the French and Indian War, the F and I, as the insiders call it. And we do have some good artifacts from early Derry, but I'm just not sure what would exactly pertain to the Garrisons. But still worth a walk, a visit if you can come by.
Right. Any other questions, or if that is it? Okay, I gotta thank you. Someone did say they were late. I did say earlier, but this program was recorded. So if you look on the Derry Public Library's YouTube page, this will be up within the next couple of days. So you can always view what you missed, or if you know someone who signed up and wasn't able to make it, it is available for people to watch.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's really a great pleasure. I'm so happy that you appreciated my research and found it interesting. And thank you for your attention, and thank you for the great questions. And hopefully I'll be able to see you on October 16th during the cemetery walk, where we can pay homage to the great woman herself and the other early Derry settlers. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's so good to see so many of you who I haven't seen for so long. So excellent. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you very much.
That's gonna be the fun thing about the cemetery walk. It's like, oh, in person, hi.
Yeah, yeah. No, that'll be great. That'll be great.
All right. Well, if that is it, then I'd like to thank everyone for coming and wish everyone a good night.
Hey, thanks a lot, Liz. Great job as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody.